In a time of growing electricity demand, growing pressure on energy infrastructure, and outcries over rising energy costs, the UK is hard-pressed to remedy all of these issues all at once. However, as detailed in a recent report from the UK's Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, the idea of demand-side response, changing the time at which electronic devices are used, might be key. So in this video we're breaking down that report to answer, how does demand-side response work? Why is it necessary? And how effective actually is it at combating the increasing electricity demand of the country? Demand-side response is the changing of the consumption of electricity to benefit the system and to balance the electrical load. At peak times, when everybody uses electricity at the same time, say to switch on the kettle after work, or watching the latest science fairs video that they'd subscribed and had notifications on for, then the electrical system, the electrical grid, has to work at full capacity and comes under stress. This is where demand-side response comes in, as by shifting electricity use away from peak times, it reduces the stress on the system as a whole. There are local benefits too that can be felt by individuals, namely that demand-side response can help to reduce energy bills for individual households. Now, the principles of demand-side response can be manually implemented, for instance by deliberately choosing to stick the dishwasher on overnight as opposed to 6 PM to avoid the peak expensive time. Or demand-side response can be implemented automatically, with devices that have been programmed to respond to a signal, usually a tariff value of the value of energy at a given moment in time. An example of this in action would be an electric car charger, which comes on intermittently when prices are lower. This is all very well, but why is demand-side response even necessary? Well, increasing electricity demand is putting more pressure on the UK's transmission system, and in its current state, forecasts suggest that an investment of £21.7 billion by 2030 is required to bring it up to scratch. The UK is becoming increasingly technological and demanding more and more energy, but ultimately, the infrastructure needs to be upgraded to as good as its peak demand. Therefore, if that peak demand was lowered, say by demand-side response, then the requirements to upgrade that infrastructure aren't as immense, and therefore aren't as costly, and money can be saved across the entire electricity system as a whole. Hopefully you're now beginning to see how demand-side response fixes the electricity problem. Demand-side response works for two major reasons though. The first is what we've just covered. Reducing peak demand, therefore reducing the amount of infrastructure required and the upgrades to it, saving money and reducing stress on the system. Secondly though, to some extent, it can help to balance supply and demand. Renewable energy resources tend to be intermittent. Solar relies on the sun and wind power on the breeze. Demand-side response though helps shift demand so that intermittence is covered by existing storage resources. Now, demand-side response isn't a new phenomenon. In the UK, since 1978, Economy 7 tariffs have been a flexible form of tariff that have provided cheaper electricity for 7 hours overnight. By reducing the price of electricity overnight, the government hopes to shift demand to that off-peak period. The result is that it simultaneously saves the consumer money and reduces stress put on the electrical system. A win-win. Another good example of demand-side response in action are agile octopus tariffs. This is a flexible tariff for electricity that can rise and fall with demand to incentivize using electricity at off-peak times. For reference, between October to December of 2023, the standard variable tariff price cap was 27 pence per kilowatt hour of energy. Agile octopus rates fluctuate and could go as high as 100 pence per kilowatt hour during peak times, but also as low as 2 pence per kilowatt hour, or even negative rates, depending on demand, ultimately disincentivizing use at peak times and incentivizing use at off-peak times. Now, this was an example of automatic demand-side response, as well as one that can save consumers money. Now, those benefits are great, but the question remains, what are the limitations of demand-side response? In practice, there are multiple problems, because the actual implementation of demand-side response without any legislation is fairly difficult. Demand-side response requires knowing exactly how much energy is being used, and when it is being used, both pieces of data which are difficult to obtain accurately. Household energy demand is erratic and unique, and there are criticisms that people can artificially inflate their baseline levels when they know they're being tested. As such, there are perceived issues about the accuracy and the fairness of blanket rules applied to mixed households. The most real issues of demand-side response, particularly manual demand-side response, is that it's a concept and one that has to be adopted by the general public. Manual demand-side response is practically a set of guidelines that have to be implemented by the homeowner. The bigger issue, though, is the practical and social factors influencing people's ability to get a hold of electronic devices which can implement automatic demand-side responses. Things like access to smart meters or electric car chargers and heat pumps. Sure, automated demand-side response is possible, but it heavily implies a class bias as expensive technology is a prerequisite for it. So yes, demand-side response does have limitations for its widespread and effective implementation. Now, just to see how well demand-side response works in practice, we can look to the 2022 to 2023 Demand Flexibility Service Trial. This was a trial that asked household owners and small business owners to reduce their demand of energy at peak periods, in return for rebates and financial rewards. In total, the energy reduction achieved during the trial was about 3.3 gigawatt hours, the rough equivalent of everyone across Great Britain making a cup of tea. The biggest problem with the trial? The incentives were too low, with people only receiving between £1 to £5 maximum. Plus, there was very little perceivable change as the baselines were very fluctuant to begin with. During the 20th century, energy was controlled from the supply side. Picture a man with an old school switchboard switching on and off power grids. Whereas in the 21st century, it's now controlled from the demand side. The challenge with demand side power is that it relies on the cooperation of all households across the United Kingdom. Demand-side response is a good concept in theory, however it does have some glaring limitations, namely that it relies upon full and unprecedented levels of cooperation to be implemented. However, the potential benefits of demand-side response? They outweigh the difficulties of implementation. On a local scale, it means cheaper energy and less blackouts. On a grander scale, it means less stress on energy infrastructure, a lower need for all-round investment, and further encouragement towards green and clean energy. It's not perfect, but demand-side response is an idea that is a step in the right direction in the drive for cheaper and more sustainable energy. Thanks for watching this episode of Science Fairs. If you enjoyed it, then the best way to support the show is to leave a like on the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you know when the next video is released. Your support is massively appreciated as we both bring on help with the videos every once in a while, and also start doing shorts as well. You can find us on YouTube Shorts, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Science Affairs Show. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.